Okay, welcome to our last EAP seminar on advanced lecture and presentation techniques. If you are going for the certificate, you've probably gotten the micro-teaching schedule if you signed up for micro-teaching. If you need to see it, I've got the schedule up here. And if you're going for the certificate, the portfolio documents are due 2 weeks from now. So next Friday and the following Friday, we're doing micro-teaching at 2 and 4 p.m. for those who signed up for it. It's going to be at our center, the CTL, the Center for Teaching and Learning. It's in the Central Plaza, Jungang. That's in the hallway behind the mini stop in the Central Plaza. And it's room 122, and we'll be back in the conference room in there. So this is the schedule if you need to see it. So next week and the following Friday, micro-teaching. 2 weeks, your portfolio materials are due. And then we'll give out certificates. So today we're going to talk about more lecture presentation techniques, talk about multimedia and technology, including not only PowerPoint, but how to use PowerPoint properly and some alternatives to PowerPoint. We'll talk about some aspects of delivery, vocal delivery. Some of them I've kind of talked about before. And we'll talk about some principles of audience interaction and body language. And if we have time, a few other things at the end, like how to remember your talk. So you'll notice, actually, I'm not using PowerPoint because PowerPoint doesn't, oops, this is bad, this is not, okay. PowerPoint doesn't move like this. I'm using something else I'll talk about in a minute. When we talk about the use of visual aids, visual presentation software like PowerPoint and others, there's some psychological principles that are helpful for good presentations. And in fact, I notice generally research psychologists are the ones who best use PowerPoint in such media. The worst people are sometimes scientists, or humanities. Some humanities people are good. There are some teachers who aren't really good at it. Business and government people are probably the most notorious for bad use of PowerPoint. We'll talk about examples. We'll consider things like the visual field and spacing, some of these other principles. The visual field, your eyes, look at the world. And it's not necessarily an even way of looking at the world in front of you. Actually, kind of the top part, what you see, the visual field, the top part is actually what your brain pays more attention to. Your brain actually pays more attention to what's kind of up here. So if my head is at this position, this is my upper visual field. Of course, the reason is probably due to evolution in our past, whether it's humans or before that. We needed to, for hunting purposes, we needed to see what animals are out there, which are kind of up here in, say, the savannah. Or if a predator like a lion is coming at you, attacking you, you need to be able to see it. So the brain pays more attention to what's kind of at the top. And so that's why we put titles at the top of PowerPoint slides. And whatever is at the top kind of gets the more attention. And so that's why we go from top to bottom. So we make good use of the visual field by putting important stuff more at the top. Titles, but also maybe important graphics. The more important the graphic is, maybe the more important stuff should go towards the top. We'll talk about some of these other principles of spacing. Contiguity and coherence means that things should logically go together. And oops. Talk about focus and interaction and the input channels. When you're using PowerPoint or visual media and then you're lecturing or talking about it, your listeners are getting information through 2 audio channels. So maybe you've had the experience of listening to somebody who is simply reading aloud their PowerPoint slide, right? Reading aloud slides, they have a lot of text maybe on the slides, and you're getting the same information both ways, visually and auditorily. That's really boring. So that's, the brain is basically taking information through 2 channels, and these 2 channels should complement each other, but they shouldn't be exactly the same. If it's exactly the same, if you're getting the same information through here and through here, it's boring, because the brain is equally processing both, but it's the same redundant information. On the other hand, they shouldn't be too completely different. Your visuals should be related to what you're saying and vice versa. Otherwise, it's a mismatch. And that's why PowerPoint slides read aloud are boring, because the brain is processing the same information twice. To illustrate some of these other principles, let's look at some examples. Is that a good slide? What's wrong with this slide? Okay, long sentences for one thing. Common mistake is to put long sentences or full sentences or a lot of text. PowerPoint is not designed for conveying a lot of information. It's simply designed as a visual aid to provide visuals. You don't want to put a lot of text. For one thing, that's a lot of text. It's boring. It's small text also. It's too small to read. If you use text, you use minimal text. You make it big enough that everybody can see it. But it's short enough that people can just look quickly at it, get the idea, and then look at you. You don't want the PowerPoint to be the teacher. You don't want the PowerPoint to dominate your lecture. You should be the teacher. You should dominate the lecture. And so the PowerPoint should be secondary to you. So if you have a lot of text or overly dense graphics, people are paying too much attention to it. You, as a lecturer, are paying too much attention to it. If a typical presenter is speaking from a PowerPoint like this, they're probably going to turn away from the audience and look at the PowerPoint too much. They're not making eye contact with the audience. They're not interacting with the audience. And then they're reading aloud the slides. Plasma glucose levels reach. And when you do that, you'll tend to fall into a monotone voice. Your voice will get boring, flat, monotone, because you're just reading aloud. You're not interacting with people. You're simply reading aloud from the screen. So PowerPoint is best for simple graphics. It's best for minimal text. Things like outlines, talking points, simple bullet points, just a few bullet points, maybe vocabulary, technical terms, definitions, things like that. It's better for simpler kinds of information. If you have a lot of information, it's maybe better to present that information in some other way, through a different medium or through a handout. Another problem with this slide. One is the text. What else? Okay, the background. There's a color clash. You should use high contrast. The text in the background should have a high contrast. The best thing is really like dark colored or black text on a white or very light background so that you can see things easily. Or if you're going to do this, this maybe should be a solid dark blue with white text. Now if you have a dark background, then maybe if you're using white text, maybe the text should be bigger, because it's kind of harder to see white text against a dark background. By the way, I've seen medical professors who like to use blood red colored backgrounds. I guess it's medical faculty, and they like bloody colors. It's okay as long as the text is big enough. It should have high contrast. If you're using a dark blue background, don't use like yellow and pink and font or text colors and such. You should use simple backgrounds. Don't try to be too pretty. You should not be trying to imitate Walt Disney. It should be a simple, serious, professional, academic slide. Easy to read, simple. Don't use, like, the background is bad here, it's hard to read. Don't use multicolor backgrounds or backgrounds that make the text hard to read. Don't use really cutesy, feminine backgrounds in something girlish or childish or unprofessional looking. Here's another example that's really bad. Too much text, bad colors. They're trying to be like Walt Disney. Doesn't work. It might work if you're teaching kids, but not for academia. There's another one, bad use of color. Should never use this. Some people like to play around with colors. It makes the text hard to read. You want the text to be big, to be high contrast and clear and readable so that everybody can read it. And hopefully so that you don't have to turn off all the lights for people to see it. That's another problem. Professors tend to turn off the lights, and so you're sitting in a dark room watching a PowerPoint, and then how does that make you feel after 30 minutes sitting in a dark room and a PowerPoint? Is Easy to stay awake? Probably not. It's probably going to put students to sleep. Things that put students to sleep are one, if you speak with a monotone, if you read aloud slides, those slides are hard to read, especially if the room is dark. I prefer not to use presentation media because I don't like turning off the lights. They're half dim. So another example is a NASA graphic from some NASA employee's PowerPoint. What do you think of that? It's too complicated, it's crowded. PowerPoint is not good for complicated graphics. This should be put on a handout instead of being presented on a PowerPoint. It's impossible to see that. It's too much. If you use images, they should be relevant, they should be salient, they should help understand. In this case, the image is not related to the text at all or the topic. Get rid of it. Don't put in cutesy animations. Especially animations are distracting. Some people put animated GIFs into their PowerPoint. It's distracting, unprofessional, unless it's really called for. PowerPoint can be good for putting in relevant, simple videos and media, sometimes multimedia. Probably don't usually need sound effects, relevant graphics. Here's an example. The left side, this is bad. So I mentioned principles of contiguity or coherence. That means related things should be together. In this version here, the labels are way down here. And so the things that you should have labeled are actually up here. And so this leads to what's called split attention. You as the viewer have to look between here and here, between here and here, between here and here. The descriptions or the labels are separated from what they refer to. Instead, what you want is something more like on the right side where the labels are inside, they're next to what they belong to. And if you use labels, they should be big enough. Sometimes you might use graphics that come from the CD-ROM that comes with your textbook. If you do that, you might want to blow them up or put them on the handout or make sure that the students actually have them with them. Because some of those graphics are really complicated, like medical graphics, biology graphics, engineering graphics. They might be complicated, and so unless they actually have that graphic in front of them in their book, you don't want to put complicated graphics where the labels are hard to read, the labels are too small, and such. There's another alternative to this I'll show you later. Here's an example of too much text. That's just awful. That's not what PowerPoint's designed for. There's another bad example. Again, there's not enough color contrast. Text is too small. It's hard to read, too much text. And the speaker is standing in front of the slide. And that's a problem. You don't want to stand in front of your slides very much. Aside from the fact that that light is really blinding. I hate stepping over there. On the other hand, you don't want to just stand in front of the podium. Some professors, especially Korean professors, older style especially, will just stand in one place at the podium to manage their PowerPoint. You want to move around a bit. If for some reason you can't move around too much because you need to click the PowerPoint or you need to use the mouse or something, you still have 1 or 2 meters around the podium where you can still move somewhat. If you move around some, it's better for audience interaction and for kind of making sure that the audience looks at you and not the PowerPoint. During a presentation, you want them to look at you more than the PowerPoint. And that's why you want to make direct eye contact with them, use gestures, use your voice well, talk to them, ask them questions. If it's a classroom setting, ask them questions to interact with them. You have to remember that you are the teacher, not the PowerPoint. There's some alternatives to PowerPoint. There are some things that kind of do the same thing. If you don't want to give Microsoft your money, or if your students don't want to give Microsoft money, have you heard of OpenOffice? It's a free office suite. It's an alternative word processor spreadsheet and presentation software. It saves it in its own native file format called Open Document. LibreOffice and OpenOffice are kind of the same thing. IBM took it and built their own free version called IBM Lotus Symphony. It has a better graphical interface. With Microsoft Office, you have that annoying ribbon at the top. Especially with Lotus, the controls are on the side, and it's a much better graphical interface. I do my documents in IBM Lotus because for formatting, it's much easier and better than Microsoft Word. So it can produce its own presentations, and you can go to portableapps.com and get a portable version of OpenOffice or LibreOffice that will install on your USB drive if you need to use it on some other computer. In fact, 2 weeks ago I had trouble logging into my Prezi. I'm using the Prezi presentation software. It's apparently a problem with this computer or the browser on this computer. It wasn't actually a problem with my password. My password was fine. What I'm doing now though, I've got my USB drive plugged in, and on my USB drive I have my own browsers. I have Firefox and Google Chrome on my flash drive. I can also install antiviruses on my USB flash drive, or OpenOffice or LibreOffice. And they're all the same format as IBM Lotus too. And I could run it off of my USB drive if the computer doesn't have Firefox or Chrome or one of these word processors. Google Docs, if you have a Gmail account, the native format in Google Docs is the same as OpenOffice. Google Docs natively uses the OpenOffice file format, the Open Document format, and you could also do presentations as well as Word files. The word processor files in Google Docs have other advantages. You can share documents, you can collaborate on documents, you can make comments on documents together. You can have your students turn in their homework through Google Docs. Now it's part of Google Drive. And you could actually make comments in the document there, and they'll get the comments right away. And so that might be a convenient way for grading papers. If you have students submit their handouts through Google Documents, and you can comment on them and give their grade and such in the document itself, and you don't have to print out hard copies or email them. You can just comment directly in the document, save it, and they've got it too. LaTeX is another nice program. Any of you use LaTeX in engineering or science, math? Okay, science, math, and engineering people, many of them, not all, but many of them use LaTeX. LaTeX is a Unix, Linux-based program. It's been around for decades. It's free. It's a bit hard to learn because it's basically a markup language. If you've ever seen math or engineering or chemistry papers, they look really beautiful. The format, the text, the font, very beautiful. They're produced in LaTeX. It's a standard free document processor that's used in some of the sciences in math and engineering. It's usually used for creating documents, like for publications and conference proceedings. There are also some LaTeX formats for producing slides. Basically PDF. LaTeX produces PDFs, but there are a couple called Prosper and Beamer that will produce slide-size PDFs. So it's basically PDF, but it works like a slide. I don't have an example right now, but I've done it once, and it was really nice because you just click on the page down and it just goes to the next slide. So it's PDF, but it works like a slide size. And with LaTeX, you can actually put sort of like on the side, you can put a navigation bar with like hyperlinks to click back and forth between different parts of your presentation file. It was really cool, I found. And for graphics, of course, PowerPoint has some, and Microsoft Office have some of their own graphics formats. A few people like to use SmartDraw. It's expensive, but it's good for producing certain kinds of graphics, especially flowcharts and concept maps and such. Some free graphics programs. GIMP is kind of like the free equivalent of Photoshop. It's free, open source. Windows, Linux, I think Macintosh also. A little harder to use, but that's what I prefer to use. Inkscape is a very, very simple graphics program for simple graphics. It's free. Notice I'm not using PowerPoint, I'm using Prezi. to go to Prezi.com. Use your Code email account to sign up for Prezi. If you use your Code account, you get the educational version. So there's the free version, which most people use. I'm using the free version, which works online through a web browser. There is a paid version, which you can download and install on your computer. I've never had to do that. I'm using the free online version, so you need an internet connection. It works through a web browser. I'm using Prezi, so it's very different from PowerPoint. You see the way it moves around and all. And I'll show you Prezi in a little bit. Some other things. Okay, this is Smart Draw. This is an example of a graph produced in Smart Draw. LaTeX, I mentioned LaTeX, so you can use the LaTeX software. If you need formulas or equations, also if you use OpenOffice, LibreOffice, those programs have an equation editor in them that uses LaTeX syntax, as well as the symbol menu. Or if you need an equation or formula for a handout or to put into your PowerPoint, well, some people buy a program, what is it, MathDraw or MathWorks or something, to create equations for their PowerPoints. But another thing you can do is you can go to this website. You can use either LaTeX syntax, so this is what LaTeX syntax looks like, or the symbol, there's a symbol pull-down menu, and you can enter an equation or formula, and it produces it in the form of a graphic, a PNG or a JPEG or a GIF image or TIF or whatever, which you can download and then put into your PowerPoint or into your handout or into your web page or something. If you look at Wikipedia pages with formulas and equations, they look like this, and I think they're using something like this. So this is an online LaTeX equation editor if you need formulas and equations, like in chemistry and math and such. That's pretty cool. So I'm using Prezi. It's free. It can now import PowerPoint as well as PDFs. You can import a PDF file. It imports it as an image. You can insert all kinds of images into a Prezi. Like you've seen, you can export also to a PDF file. I've got a PDF online for this handout, for this talk. In Prezi, you can also do a search for images from google.com or Google image search and then directly import them into your Prezi and such. So it is kind of like a canvas. So let me see if I have a picture here. So here's a screenshot of Prezi. Now they changed their interface recently, so it's a little different. So basically, this is from a previous talk I did here in this series. So each of these slides is like a box. And here I imported some PDFs and it imports them as graphics. And here's some regular kinds of boxes and slides that I created in Prezi. And but you create them on what is kind of like a big canvas. And you're basically just zooming around from one part of your canvas to the next. So basically I'm just zooming around from slide to slide on a big canvas. And there's a sidebar where you can change the order of slides. You can change the order of things. You can go back and forth between one thing and another. It's hard to do that in PowerPoint. Like if I'm giving a presentation, sometimes I like to kind of hit people with the main points, like an outline at the beginning, and then I talk through maybe one of those body sections. I like to come back to the outline. And that's actually a good thing to do, and talk about the next section, come back to the outline, you see where you are and where you're going. That's a good organizational technique. In PowerPoint, you can do that. You just copy and paste your overview slide repeatedly. In Prezi, you just simply come back to it. You can go from here, then come back here again, go around here, and back here. It's easy in Prezi. So it's more like a canvas. So there are relative advantages and disadvantages. By the way, this is the old Prezi wheel. They recently changed this, but it's kind of a cool looking interface. There's some more Prezi. You can also use these lines to control the order in which you go from one thing to another. Let me show you some other things you can do with Prezi. You can, like I said, you can import all kinds of graphics. You can embed a YouTube video. And actually, I've got a couple of YouTube videos in this Prezi, which I might show you later. Right now, the YouTube videos are loading in the background. By the time I get to them, they will be ready to go. So it's kind of handy. We mentioned that some graphics are really too complex for PowerPoint. In Prezi, you can zoom in into graphics. If you have complex graphics, Prezi is a good option. Or here's another example. Just zoom in. So there are advantages and disadvantages to PowerPoint versus Prezi. In general, I only use PowerPoint or Prezi if I really have to. Actually, I never use PowerPoint unless it's a conference presentation where it's kind of expected. Sometimes I use Prezi for presentations. Otherwise, especially for the things I normally teach, I just use a whiteboard. I like whiteboards. There's no reason you can't use a whiteboard. It's more interactive, I think, in some ways. Unless it takes too much time to write things on the whiteboard. In that case, a handout might be better, or Prezi or PowerPoint. PowerPoint is maybe good for information that needs to be presented sequentially. So some science lectures, math lectures, if you want a very sequential one after the other presentation, PowerPoint might be good for that. For some things where you want to have more of an artsy or non-linear, non-sequential, more of a free style of presentation, Prezi might be good for that kind of presentation. So you can play with it. It's actually easy to learn. And I find it takes less time to prepare a Prezi than a PowerPoint. Some cautions though, some people like to do this with Prezis. Okay, how are you feeling? Like that. I've seen people zoom around too much. You can go from slide to slide, but you can also kind of change the orientation, and so you zoom around. You can also rotate in Prezi. I've seen people rotate too much to a degree that makes you seasick or motion sick, and it's not very professional. So avoid over zooming, over rotating. Okay, so that's some tips on presentation media itself. And just as a teacher though, a few other things that might make your lives easier. Dropbox, Google Drive, and Box.net, these are cloud storage services. These can be useful for teachers also. I'm not going to talk about Box.net because that's really more designed for businesses. It's got a really difficult web interface that I find it not convenient. Although you can get these on your smartphone, by the way, including Box.net. I use Dropbox and sometimes Google Drive. I do some documents from Google Drive, Google Documents. I mentioned it might be convenient for grading. It's also good in terms of having students turn in assignments through Google Docs, which you can comment on right there and such. Also, my grading spreadsheets for the various courses that I teach. I do my spreadsheets in Google Drive, Google Docs, so it's really convenient whether I'm at my office computer or my home computer, it's just there. I don't need to remember to open up an Excel file somewhere or carry it with me on a thumb drive. Whatever computer I'm at, wherever I am, I can log in to Google Drive and then work on things like spreadsheets and other course documents. I use Dropbox a lot too for teaching. Let's compare. Dropbox so these are cloud storage services. Have you all heard of Dropbox? Okay, no? Okay, have you all heard of Google Drive? Hopefully. So these are cloud storage services, and both of these basically install as a folder on your hard drive. Start with Dropbox, for example. You can start with 2 gigabytes free account. If you're a business user, you can buy bigger storage space. You can get up to 8 gigabytes free with various promotionals. For example, if you don't have Dropbox, in my handout I've got a promotional code you can use. Use my promotional code. We both get bonus memory, like half a gigabyte extra for free. So help me out with bonus memory. It works on all platforms: Windows, Linux, Macintosh, Android, the iPhone operating systems, iPad, whatever. It works on everything. It's very reliable. It basically installs as a folder on each of your devices or computers. So now if I work on a document on one computer, it automatically syncs to the other computers, you know, if they're on. And so I can work on my documents. I do a lot of documents for teaching and research and stuff. I can work on them at the office. And when I get home, they're there on my home computer, and I can continue working on them. I don't have to remember to bring my hard drive. And I used to bring documents on my external hard drive or my USB drive, and I would forget them. I would forget, oh, I left my hard drive at the office. Or I left my flash drive at home. I have to go back and get it. It was really annoying. Dropbox has really simplified my life as a teacher and as a researcher. It's just like a folder on your hard drive, and it automatically synchronizes files between all your computers. I also use an email software to check my email, and the email folder, the storage folder, is inside one of my Dropbox folders. And so again, for my email account, I use an email program, an email software, but it's still synchronizing the folders through Dropbox. So I can, all my emails, my drafts, and copies are on all my computers. It's quite reliable. It works pretty well. 2 gigabytes. If you need more, Google Drive offers 5 gig free. It's still kind of buggy though in some ways, and it doesn't work so well for Linux. Oh, it has no Linux support. Since I use Linux, that matters for me. The website for this class, for the seminar series, it's hosted on my Dropbox. Dropbox has a public folder which you can use to host your own websites, your web pages. It won't be indexed by Google. It's kind of like a part of the web that Google doesn't index, so it might not show up in Google search results. For me, that's fine. I don't want them to show up in Google so easily. I used to have a lot of my class material on my previous website. It was a fully public website, and people would I noticed that people would steal my documents and post them on other accounts. Like I found one of my old handouts on SlideShare. Somebody uploaded my document on SlideShare as one of their own files. Like, this is my file. Anyway, so you can host web pages on Dropbox, and it won't show up on Google search. There might be ways to make it happen if you want to, but you put a link on your blog site or something. Google Docs doesn't offer free web pages yet. Google does have a free web page service, but it's extremely limited. It's not very good. This is what you can, if I'm on another computer, let's say I need a file from my Dropbox, maybe I need to download it on a public computer, well, I can log into my Dropbox account just through a web browser, like this. And this is the web browser interface. If I just need to download it from some other computer where I don't have my Dropbox installed. On my own computer, though, this is what my Dropbox folder looks like. It's my Linux web browser. So that's on my own computer. And that's what Google Drive looks like. Kind of cute. So as a teacher, these apps are really nice to have. Oh, here I've come back to my outline slide. I can easily do that in Prezi. So we've talked about multimedia. I've talked briefly about delivery, because I've talked about aspects of delivery before. So flow and nervousness, it helps to practice. So I've talked about practicing before. It helps to rehearse and practice presentations, especially important ones, for the sake of flow. And so in order to do that, you want to practice multiple times, or at least mentally rehearse things. Maybe one time to practice on the content, another time to practice on your vocal delivery, another time to practice on pronunciation, and then again contents and organization. Each time you rehearse, you should focus on something, on one specific thing. You don't want to focus on too many things at once when you're rehearsing, because you'll be mentally distracted. During your real presentation, your real lecture, you just want to focus on your content. You don't want to think about your English, because that will distract you from the content and you will make mistakes. You don't want to make the mistake of just putting too much information in your PowerPoint, thinking that will help you, because then it will be a very boring PowerPoint lecture. We'll talk about nervousness and something else called efficacy. Nervousness is not, like I said before, it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you are excessively nervous, you are maybe focusing too much on what other people will think of you. You can partly overcome that by adequate rehearsal and focusing on your contents, thinking about your contents. And if you really are interested or believe in your contents, that should be the focus. And don't worry if people believe you or agree with you or disagree with you or such. If you focus on your contents enough and that you're enthusiastic enough about your contents, that will overcome that kind of problem. That will allow you to actually focus on the contents and then interact with the audience by looking at them and trying to get them to agree with you or understand you using your eye contact and your gestures and your body language more effectively when you focus on the content of your talk, not how people perceive you or your grammar or your English skills. With practice, you should develop over time a sense of efficacy. Efficacy is a sense of effectiveness. Your effectiveness as a teacher, as a lecturer, whatever. Efficacy comes from maybe several things. It comes, one, from seeing good examples. One, if you've maybe had professors who were good lecturers, maybe you've learned from that and maybe internalized some of their lecture and teaching techniques. Two, it comes from maybe seeing other examples like on TED.com and such and kind of imitating and learning from them, internalizing some of those techniques. We'll see some examples in a minute. Thirdly, it comes from practicing yourself, getting enough chances to do public speaking, teaching, conference presentations, and developing your sense of how to manage the flow of information and how to present things, how to talk, how to interact with the audience, feel comfortable with an audience. Fourthly, it comes from also reflecting on presentation. So before the presentation, you mentally think about how you're going to present things and imagining yourself presenting and presenting well, because that can help you think of what you need to do to present well. After your presentation, you go back and you reflect on your presentation or your lecture and think about what did I do well, what did I not do so well, what can I improve, how can I improve that, and then maybe, okay, I'll go to TED.com and look for a good speaker and learn from his example of how to improve that part of my talk. Some online resources to kind of learn from and imitate good speaking styles. You've probably heard of TED.com, hopefully. Technology Education and Development Conference. Number of very intelligent, popular talks on all kinds of subjects. There's also OCW Online Courseware, which is more specific academic talks. So many universities now publish basically or offer online actual class lectures by professors. It might be audio lectures. More often at the better sites, it's video lectures, or sometimes they're course materials. Code has an OCW site. If you just Google OCW, you can find a lot more good sites. Some really good ones are Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley. They have good OCW sites where you can get free MIT, where you can actually download and watch lectures maybe in your field. Find a good or famous lecturer in your field and learn from how he or she presents contents, how he or she talks to the audience, presents materials, and as well as explains the concepts in your field. So those are good resources for improving your speaking abilities. Let's see, some examples. Here's one example. So notice YouTube videos are already loaded here in my Prezi. Except I have no audio. That's okay though, if the audio is not working. It's okay. No. Is it muted? Okay. Well, for some reason we don't have audio. That's okay. You can actually go back. This is Daniel Pink. He's talking about motivation in business. You can look for Daniel Pink. This is a very good presentation about how businesses often use wrong ways of motivating employees, ways that actually contradict what we know in psychology about motivation. It's okay that we don't have the audio because you can just look at his presentation style. Does he look like a good presenter? In what way? What do you notice? Sure. Okay. Very natural use of gestures. It's a very moderate use of gestures, and that's one thing that you can notice when you turn the audio off. I wish we could have the audio because you could also hear he has a good speaking voice. It's a very loud, clear speaking voice. Maybe you need to practice a loud, clear speaking voice as a teacher. I might have mentioned before the diaphragm, if I'm coming to the diaphragm later. My notes. Yes, I am. The muscles down here, basically, for example, I suck in my stomach muscles, tense my stomach muscles. That pushes the diaphragm muscle up. That pushes my lungs in so that I have more energy and more vocal volume. And especially in English as a second language, you need to do this for the energy because English has more intonation. You need to probably rehearse the intonation, have more intonational range, especially guys with a deep voice. You need to work on your intonational range, more intonation, because English has more intonation. And guys, especially if you have a low voice, it's actually not as easy to hear in teaching kind of environment. A voice that's either higher or a voice that has more intonational range is going to be easier to hear and more interesting to listen to. Whereas if you have a monotone voice, that's going to be boring for your audience. So if you have a relatively monotonal voice or a deep voice especially, you need to practice your intonational range. And also just English has more complex intonation. On words where there's a stressed or accented syllable in words, there's a pitch change. So stressed syllables are longer and louder in English, and there's also an intonation or pitch rise and fall. And then also the last word of a sentence, or the last important word, most important word, main idea of a sentence, called sentence stress, there's an extra strong intonation. And so you notice in my sentences, toward the end of each phrase, usually there's a word that I highlight as more important. I'm putting extra stress on it, extra intonation, as well as loudness. And so you can listen to guys like this speaking and how they speak very clearly. He's a very good speaker. You can listen to Steve Jobs, of course. He's a really good speaker, too. Anything else you notice about him? You see gestures. What else? Does he look confident? Pretty confident. He's a business consultant, by the way. You see he's well-dressed, which kind of helps. When Americans tend to dress too informally. He's moving around some. That's also good to move around and help your students pay attention to you. You don't have to move around the way Steve Jobs does. If you notice Steve Jobs, he moves freely around the whole stage. He makes use of the whole stage, which is good. You don't have to move around that much, especially if it's not natural. You don't want to go too far. There are some younger Americans who maybe gesture too much. And there's a series of YouTube videos that I really love. It's called Crash Course. This Crash Course Biology and Science Show and Crash Course World History, especially the science ones. They're really good videos, but the narrator, he's a young American guy. He's always gesturing too much. And I find it kind of annoying, but the content is great. So moderate use of gestures is confident. Too much gesturing is kind of nervous. Too little gesturing, it seems kind of like you're not very enthusiastic. You notice the gestures he's using, like emphasis, he's doing like that. These are kind of maybe for emphasis, or some gestures kind of like for flow, help you with the flow of thought. Or sometimes, there's emphasis right there, like that. He's kind of emphasizing points that helps people understand. It's like sentence stress. It kind of conveys something about the flow of the thought and what's important. And speakers will also maybe point to the screen sometimes and do things like that. We can maybe go into some other examples. Looks like he needs a haircut, but he's actually a very well-known journalist and writer of the New York Times, who has written several books. What's his name? Name escapes me right now. He wrote Blank, Tipping Point. Forget his name, sorry. It'll come back to me in a minute. He's a very well-known writer. He's not as good as a speaker. He doesn't seem as used to public speaking. His use of gestures is good. His voice is not as strong. Maybe a little bit nervous. Blank, Tipping Point, What the Dog Saw. Who wrote that? Malcolm Gladwell. Yes, Malcolm Gladwell. Anyway, this is a British guy who's a British education professor. His name is Ken Robinson. He's one of the most popular talks on TED.com. He has very good ideas about education. He's also very funny. So you can see he's very confident. He has a good voice. It probably works out. One thing for a good voice is maybe working out, jogging and exercise. Very good for the lung capacity, for strong lungs and a strong voice. So I highly recommend working out. We need to zoom away so you can see him kind of on the stage. Yeah, that's too much of a close-up. You do see some more distant shots later on, but okay, he's very popular, so the camera's zooming in on him all the time. Okay, so you're zooming out. That's a little bit nervous. Okay, that's not good. I have that problem too. He's kind of playing with his hands. That's kind of a nervous gesture. If you're kind of like rubbing yourself, it's kind of a nervous gesture. So he's probably nervous. So even the best public speakers, he's an excellent speaker. You see a little nervousness there. So even the best speakers are nervous. But aside from a few giveaway gestures like that, generally he's very confident. His speaking voice and style are extremely confident, very smooth. He has a great voice. He's also very funny. People love to listen to him because he's making great points and he's using humor. And it's good to use humor a little bit naturally. You don't want to force humor if it's not natural, but it helps if humor naturally comes out. It helps you as a speaker, as a teacher. So he seems very confident, yet you see a little nervousness. So probably most or all good speakers, even the best speakers, are going to be nervous. It's just that they manage to harness or control that nervous energy, because nervousness is a natural mental response to a stressful situation. And I've said this before, it's a natural psychological response. It's totally okay to be, there's a certain range of nervousness. It's actually perfectly okay. Now, excessive nervousness means you're probably too worried about how people are evaluating you, too self-consciousness. But there's a certain amount of nervousness that's actually quite okay, because that's the brain's way of responding to an important situation. The brain is providing extra energy, extra reserves, extra attention that you need to focus on something important. And so public speakers use that nervous energy because you need energy for your brain to think and focus on the content, what you're saying. You need energy especially to speak, to project your voice. And so it comes from one, sucking in your stomach and using your diaphragm and projecting out, and using also that nervous energy to speak, to project your voice and to have intonation, to have the enthusiasm, because he must be probably tired after that. He's very enthusiastic as a speaker. Daniel Pink, the first one we saw, he's pretty enthusiastic too. So that takes energy, and good speakers draw from the nervous energy to have that energy, because teaching can be tiring. You need to show enthusiasm, whether it's a conference presentation or teaching a class. It helps you if you have enthusiasm, you have emotion, which shows in your vocal range and your gestures and such. Because if you are enthusiastic as a teacher, your students will get the idea that what you're teaching is interesting or important or worthwhile. And it will probably be more motivated as students to take your class, to do well in your class, and maybe to continue studying in that field if you are an enthusiastic teacher. He's very enthusiastic, by the way. So he's making really good use of his nervousness, his nervous energy. Okay, so those are some aspects of delivery. So I mentioned kind of intonation stress, the need for rehearsal, diaphragm use and energy. Also, drinking water is probably the best thing while you're talking, while you're lecturing. Coffee is not good. Coffee dries up the vocal cords, makes it harder to talk. Caffeine in general does that. It's good to avoid sugar right before you talk. Some people rely on sugar. I've even seen, when I first started teaching, I would bring sodas to class. Not good. Why? Whether it's sodas or carbs, like from pastries, or even fruit juices have a lot of added sugar, or candy and such. Carbs and sugar are not good, because maybe within the first 15 minutes you get this sort of energy spike as the sugar or carbs go into your bloodstream, and you get this temporary 15-minute kind of surge in energy. But the body can't tolerate sugar or carbs in the bloodstream. The body releases insulin to take it out. And so the body is going to remove it in about 15 or 20 minutes. And then you get more tired. So it's at best a very temporary thing. Worst of all, it's probably going to make you unhealthy, because when the body needs to remove that stuff from your blood, it stores it. It stores it either as fat tissue, which is going to make you more tired over the long term, or it's going to store it as triglycerides, which is a sort of fatty substance in the blood, which over time will lead to, can contribute to, cholesterol, heart disease problems. And a couple of years ago, I found out that I had a problem with that stuff. I started exercising. I lost weight, and I felt better. I had more energy, and I cut down on my sugar intake. More energy, better health, better energy for teaching, because teaching takes a lot of energy, at least teaching well. Again, this is a diaphragm. It's the muscle down here at the bottom of your lungs. And so it's important to manage your diaphragm. You can do breathing exercises, or sometimes I just go around, walk around, and remember to tense my stomach muscles and diaphragm muscles, just to exercise the diaphragm. Sometimes when I'm just walking around or sitting, when I can remember. When I'm actually lecturing, I have to remember sometimes to suck it in so I can project my voice. Because I do tend to have a weak voice. I was really sick a couple of years ago and that damaged my voice. So I really had to try extra harder. There's some breathing exercises that you can do if you have friends who are singers. They can show you some breathing exercises. Things like breathing in very slowly, and pushing in on your diaphragm with your hand. And just breathe in very, very slowly. And do this like a few minutes in the morning, or breathe in slowly and breathe out, vocalizing a vowel. Oh, this just makes sure nobody's around, because you look kind of weird. There are exercises like that you can learn about. I think there's I'm not sure if it's available to you, but on the CTL website, there's one recent talk by somebody, a Korean voice training expert. Teaching, another thing that probably is not covered in a lot of teaching training courses is body language. We mentioned body language a little bit, but it's helpful to learn good body language because that can help you to appear more confident. Some people don't know what to do with their arms or even their legs when they're teaching or lecturing. Do you want to do this when you're teaching? How does it look?
Very apart.
Yes, aloof, yes. This is kind of a defensive gesture. And so there are some gestures that are kind of psychologically, even maybe subconsciously defensive. And maybe some people are not aware that they are defensive, but it conveys, at least subconsciously, certain signals. When you're listening to somebody, especially guys, we might do this because it's comfortable, but it might convey to the listener, I'm being defensive, or I'm not agreeing with you. If I'm doing this as a teacher, it might seem as a defensive gesture as a teacher, the one who's controlling the floor, then I'm going to seem kind of aloof or too proud or condescending or such. So defensive gestures involve kind of covering your body with your limbs or with something, and these are kind of like the hands and arms and legs and torso kinds of gestures. And those are the ones probably first of all to work on if you're not used to public speaking and your gestures are not very natural. Some people just don't know what to do with their arms. Yeah, you saw in the videos, those guys knew what to do with their arms. They're using their arms for flow, for emphasis, for maybe pointing to the screen, or you can use one hand to control your pointing device, and another hand can be free to kind of motion, or you can have notes, or pretend to have notes in one hand, so you can use this hand, give this hand something to do, and then use your other hand for kind of some natural gestures. You kind of hold the hands out here, kind of like I'm doing, kind of suggest readiness. I'm ready to talk about and explain what I'm doing, and I'm kind of doing this for kind of flow and such. Some people really don't know what to do with their arms and sometimes their legs. So this is kind of defensive, or especially if you're grabbing your arm, that's kind of like you're not confident. You need to hold on to something because you're not sure of yourself. Or I've seen this. I saw one person do this. And this doesn't look good because you're holding on to yourself, which kind of conveys lack of confidence and such. Other defensive gestures might be crossing your legs. That's a defensive gesture. Or doing this. It's kind of like you're protecting yourself from something. And that's kind of defensive, which might convey weakness or shyness or lack of confidence. This is not as bad. It might be comfortable, but do you think this is okay to do for a long time? Why not?
Doesn't look comfortable enough.
Pardon?
Doesn't look good enough.
It doesn't look good. Why?
You're hiding.
Yeah, so basically psychologically, a lot of these gestures have some psychological meaning which may not be easy to articulate consciously, but people do get the impression at some level psychologically. If I do this for a long time, it kind of means I'm hiding something. That's kind of the meaning, because in our evolutionary past, you do this if you're hiding a weapon. Or you could be like holding yourself really like this, meaning I'm not confident also, which isn't good either. So you don't want to do this too much. I've seen people hide behind a podium, or even like hold onto the podium, like they're afraid they're going to float away, and that's not good. You want to be free, you want to walk around and interact with the audience, use gestures to get their attention. Some people might hold a bag in front of them, or ladies might hold a purse. Again, that's defensive, it looks weak and lacking confidence. So don't hold your purse or other objects in front of you too much. Or you could hold a water bottle. Okay. Other thing, excessive gesturing, I mentioned like that, that's not good. It's like an Italian who's had too much coffee or something. Hands and arms, you don't want to clasp your hands too much. It's kind of maybe nervousness, or if you're stroking yourself, rubbing yourself, it's kind of like you're trying to soothe or comfort yourself when you're rubbing yourself. Maybe like this means you're nervous and such. Sometimes you might you're evaluating something, you're thinking about something. So a little bit of rubbing the face, like I'm thinking and intellectualizing, okay. But two ways, and this can be bad if you do it too much. One, if you're resting your head on something, even if you have to rest your head on your finger or hand to some degree at all, it means you're feeling bored or not paying attention, whether you're the speaker or whether you're the listener in the audience. It could also mean nervousness. If you're touching your face too much, that can convey nervousness. Or if you're talking, it might convey I'm lying. If I'm touching my face too much, or pulling myself, or pulling my collar, or touching my nose, it might mean nervousness. Or in some situations, it might be one of several indicators taken together, which could mean I'm lying. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let me go on to some examples. Here's really bad body language. It's from a debate 4 years ago. McCain realized he was going the wrong way, and I don't know why he did this. This is really awkward, but his tongue came out. That just looks really bad. So the camera just happened to, there was maybe a split second, the camera caught it, and it looked really funny. This was really popular on the internet, because it looks so funny. But kind of like awkward catching yourself, like, reversing direction. You need to maybe, if you need to reverse your direction, you have to move your feet in a way that's more graceful. Not like that. It's like he was kind of that. Kind of maybe bend down here. You've probably seen this. This is popular on the internet a few years ago. So if, like McCain, if you have to suddenly move, it's better to maybe bend your knees a little bit so you can have better body weight distribution, so you're not as awkward or off balance. I think McCain was getting off balance. Bush was overusing facial gestures in a way that looked dumb and such. So be careful of excessive facial gestures. In this case, of course, he's just looking dumb as he was good at, but other facial gestures that might be too excessive. It's important to smile moderately. You don't want to be too serious-faced. You want to kind of balance professionalism and warmth and friendliness, or even a sense of humor as a teacher or as a professor or scholar and such. You don't want to smile too much. Smiling too much can make you look kind of dumb or weak or inconfident, and especially ladies, you don't want to smile too much because that might make you seem weak or lacking confidence, especially to superior males. Sometimes smiling, especially excessive smiling, can convey submissiveness. So keep that in mind, how much you smile. If it's too much, it might convey submissiveness. Or you're being submissiveness, or you're being weak or lacking confidence. Also, it's kind of hard to do a fake smile. Sometimes you do fake smiles. So a real smile involves moving, comes from here, comes from the cheekbone, the muscles back here pull the mouth, and also the eye muscles back. And that's a real smile. And sometimes we do a fake smile, or a pretend or polite smile, where we just move the mouth muscles. It's really hard to pretend to do a real smile. It's really hard. So keep that in mind, especially guys, keep in mind, guys are not as good at reading gestures and body language, but women are especially good at detecting body language and gestures and what they mean. And so, for example, women are going to be good at distinguishing a real smile from a fake smile. So people can see you. And sometimes you do have to do fake smiles for politeness, but keep in mind that it is, to people who know body language, it is apparent. Another example of body language. Remember this scene? What was Bill Clinton saying at this time? This is a famous picture of Clinton. Huh? This was when he was, when the Monica Lewinsky scandal was breaking. On TV, he did this: "I did not have sex with Monica Lewinsky." He's being very emphatic. So there are certain lying gestures. Like I mentioned, maybe touching your face too much because you're nervous or guilty. But also, liars, we think of liars as being people who look away, who don't do direct eye contact. And that's sometimes true. Some liars look away from you too much, but especially kids. But people who are more used to lying, they do the opposite. They do too much direct eye contact. And here he's doing too much direct eye contact, very strong, bold direct eye contact. It's to compensate for the lying. And pointing. And that's kind of a compensation strategy. So with lying, it's not just one thing, but if you look at several factors together that might indicate he's lying. It could be looking away, no direct eye contact, or too much overly direct eye contact, pointing, over emphatic, too much direct eye contact, and maybe also playing with the legs or such under the chair. Those are things that can be. So actually psychologists looked at this at the time and they could tell he was lying. Because psychologists who know body language, they could analyze his language and tell he was lying before the rest of us really knew the truth. What else? Some other things with gesturing. In a group of people, person who's maybe dominant in the group is maybe leading the use of gestures, and the other people are maybe following and imitating. So maybe two friends, if one is kind of like the dominant person in the friendship, the other person will kind of imitate or mirror their gestures. And as a teacher, you're kind of setting the tone, you're dominating the class, and you're using your eye contact to look at students and make sure that they agree, or I could say something, blah, 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 you agree? Yes, and I do that to get students engaged and make them agree with me. So I'm kind of leading the gestures, and other people will probably follow the leader and imitate their gestures. If you look at couples together, one person will gesture and the other person will do similar gestures. And that's kind of mirroring. So one person is leading and the other is mirroring, by the way. So you want to check your gestures if you've not used to public speaking. Make sure your gestures are natural. Maybe record yourself And pay attention to your gestures. That's one thing to look at, as well as your vocal intonation. Another thing is proxemics. Perhaps sometimes for teaching, when you're talking with students, proxemics has to do with how closely you stand with somebody and use of physical space with somebody. Let me see for an example. Let me get you, if you could stand up. Okay. So, and come over here. So if we were having a casual conversation, how far would you stand from me? About here? Okay. And then could you stand up, and then how far apart would you two, if you two were just having a casual conversation, could you show me how far you would be from each other? About that much? Okay. By North American standards, it's kind of far. So you can sit down now. So Asians are pretty conservative about body space, especially between men and women. So do you know that if you are interacting with people from other cultures, Westerners especially, they will tend to be closer together, including male and female interactions. So a Westerner, like a male and a female, would probably be a bit closer together. If they're from North America or England, for example, they'll probably be somewhat closer together. If they're from Northern Europe or Europe, they would be even closer together. So sometimes I've talked to like Northern European women, and they'll just be like this far away from my face. And it seems kind of uncomfortable at first. And so that's something you have to get used to. Another kind of proxemics may have to do with your interaction with your students. If I stand right here, how do you feel?
Wow, a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, so it's kind of intimidating. So if you're directly in front of somebody, either standing like this, or if you're sitting across from a table, this is kind of, if I'm sitting down together, this is kind of interview kind of stuff, where I'm like interviewing you. So I'm asserting dominance over you by being directly in front of you. And sometimes you might want to take advantage of that in, say, teacher-student interactions, or interacting, if you're at a job interview, you're going to be the one who's put on the spot, and they may do that to you. And you have to be ready for that and realize it's deliberate. And you have to learn to be confident and comfortable in that situation and manage your body language and your voice use and such. What's probably more comfortable is if you want a more friendly kind of interactions, maybe diagonal from somebody or side to side like this. If this is the edge of the table, you're sitting here, maybe I'm standing, or if I'm sitting here, the side, that's more of like a friendly kind of interaction, or maybe for coaching, if I coach professors. When professors see me for consulting sessions, I sit like that from them so that they're more comfortable. Because I'm not going to assert dominance with other professors. I want them to be kind of one-to-one. Or two people can be side to side, next to each other, kind of collaborative, kind of sitting and such. And so those are some things to think about. And I've got another handout on the website that kind of has a brief summary of body language and such. There's some cultural differences in body language. The V sign, this might mean victory in North America, but in Britain and Australia, this is a bad gesture. You don't do this. Okay in America, very informal though. This has other meanings in some cultures. This can be an insult. The thumbs up can have different meanings. Holding hands. Between same genders, it's okay in East Asia, but not in the West so much. I never use this, but the longhorn sign, this is an American victory cheer, but in some countries this is an insult. I mentioned proximity, touching. There are differences in how, just light friendly touching and such, like patting somebody on the shoulder. In the West, especially Southern Europe, or in even Southern US, they're kind of more open about friendly touching, even between genders. Eye gaze, of course, Westerners prefer more direct eye contact, looking actually at into your eyeballs, even between genders to some degree. I've become more Asianized, and I'm used to looking kind of around the eyes. But keep in mind that for some Westerners, if you don't engage in direct eye contact, like looking at their eyes, they might perceive that as dishonest, like you're hiding something, and like you're looking away. It's just a culture difference. And for you, if a Westerner is looking directly at you, especially cross-gender, that might make you feel nervous, but they're doing that because it's natural for them. In some cultures, like in some African cultures, I think there's a difference in eye contact depending on whether you're speaking or listening. I forget how it goes. If you're speaking or listening, you engage in more or less direct eye contact with the person, and maybe you look away while the person is talking, and then you direct the eye contact when they're speaking. I guess one last thing, one final tip for lectures and presentations I want to share with you. Time's about up. So one last thing, this is not in the notes, but if it's a really important talk, a conference presentation or special talk, you can get nervous and sidetracked because you're worrying too much about trying to memorize the structure of the talk and following a script. You don't want to, memorize a script because you'll focus too much on where am I, oh, I got lost, and you'll get lost because your brain is multitasking between the language or script, focusing on your English, or the script you're trying to memorize and the contents of your talk. So there are some ancient memory techniques that public speakers use for this, and I do this for special talks where I create visual associations with different parts of the room. Even if I don't know exactly the room layout, I can still do this in my mind before the talk. So for example, a couple months ago I gave a special talk in an audience where I was talking about English and how to get away from the pressure of learning English and learn English more naturally without all the kind of high pressure that's common in the educational system here. So in my talk I talked about the challenges that Koreans face in learning English. I talked about some of the misconceptions that Koreans have about learning English. Then I talked about motivational issues, bad kinds of motivation, positive kinds of motivation. Then I talked about better ways of learning English, better strategies, better goals, ways of increasing your confidence in English and such. Notice I'm pointing to different parts of the room because I use a spatial memory device. This is an old technique. I create kind of mental images in different parts of the room that remind me of the different parts of my talk. And I kind of created the images maybe before the talk. When I got to the room, I kind of actually planted the images in those parts of the room. So beforehand, challenges of learning English. I imagine my kind of memory aid, I would imagine like a weightlifter challenge, something difficult. So I imagine like a weightlifter. And so when I got to the room beforehand, then I put in my mind over there an image of the weightlifter. So during my talk, I give my introduction, and I have some mnemonics for the introduction kind of over here. Then over there, okay, there's my weightlifter. So I just look in that corner of the room quickly, and okay, there's my weightlifter. That's kind of a cue, a hint, challenges of learning English. And then I'll look in that corner of the room, and I forget what image I used, but I put an image over there in that corner that reminded me of misconceptions or myths. Okay, I imagined like a picture like an ancient Greek god, mythology, misconceptions. And then kind of other images after that that reminded me of my subpoints under that. So I just kind of quickly go to that point of the room, my eyes go there, I know where I am. I won't forget because I just look over there, I know where I am in my talk. Then down the middle of the road, various images that help me to remember different points about motivation, bad motivation, go up, good motivation. Over there, several images that help me to remember strategies, goals, confidence. So I have these images. The more interesting, strange, dynamic, motion involving movement or motion they are, the easier it is to remember. And I memorized the outline of my talk that way so that when I got out on stage, I was able to give the talk basically from memory. Because I had to more or less memorize it because they were giving subtitles for the audience and translated into Korean, so I had to follow the outline very closely. So I had to memorize a detailed outline. So I used these like really interesting images that helped me to remember the talk beforehand. And that's a really cool trick. So I do that whenever I give an important talk, and it's very effective. This is a kind of an ancient memory trick system, mnemonics or memory devices. And there are books out there that can also teach you more other kinds of memory tricks for public speaking, for memorizing content for classes, for memorizing lists of words, people's names and such. So you can find more out there. I'll try to put a link on the website for that. And I fixed some other links on the website recently, by the way. So Any questions? It's not. Okay, so I hope to see some of you next week or 2 weeks for micro-teaching, or when you send me your portfolios. So thanks, and see you later.